think you know who owns the house you live in. You pay your rent, you sign your contract, you assume there is a direct line between you and the person whose name is on the deed. But for hundreds of thousands of people across the United Kingdom, that line doesn't exist. The person they call their landlord doesn't own the property. The real owner has no idea who is actually sleeping in their bedrooms. And the person collecting the rent is operating an entirely separate, highly profitable and largely unregulated business in the middle.
This is the shadow housing market. It is a multi-billion-pound industry built on a concept known as rent-to-rent.
And it has exploded across Britain's cities.
It is transforming family homes into illegal micro-hotels. It is costing the taxpayer over £1 billion a year in social housing fraud.
And it is operating right under the noses of local councils who are completely unequipped to stop it. If you spend more than 10 minutes on property TikTok or Instagram, you will see the pitch. A young, impeccably dressed entrepreneur promising financial freedom through property
without needing a mortgage, a deposit or a deed.
The strategy they are selling is called rent to rent. The premise is simple. You find a landlord, you offer them guaranteed rent every month, and you take over the management of the property. You then sublet the property, usually by converting it into a house in multiple occupation, or HMO. You rent out the individual rooms for a higher total sum than the guaranteed rent you are paying the owner. The difference is your profit. When done legally, with full transparency, proper commercial leases, and the express written consent of the property owner, it is a legitimate business model. It is effectively corporate subletting. But the shadow market doesn't bother with transparency. It operates on deception. Because a vast majority of standard assured short-hold tenancy agreements and almost all residential mortgages explicitly forbid subletting.
According to recent survey data, a staggering 68% of UK landlords have discovered their tenants letting out their property without permission.
That is more than 2/3 of the private rental sector touched by unauthorised subletting. The most common tactic is the illegal HMO conversion. A family home is rented by a middle tenant. Without the owner's knowledge, the living room is partitioned with cheap stud walls to create an extra bedroom.
A 3-bedroom house suddenly houses 5 or 6 separate unrelated adults. The superior landlord receives their standard £1,500 a month, thinking a family lives there. The middle tenant collects $3,500 a month in room rent.
They pocket £2,000 a month in pure, untaxed cash flow, and they do it across 5, 10 or 20 properties. They build an empire on assets they do not own.
But the real danger isn't just financial deception, it is safety. When a property is illegally converted into an HMO,
it evades the rigorous safety standards required by law. Legal HMOs require specific fire doors, interconnected smoke alarms, emergency lighting, and strict gas and electrical safety certificates. They require a license from the local council. The shadow market ignores all of this, because applying for a license would alert the council, who would alert the actual owner.
So the properties operate entirely off the books, packing vulnerable tenants into unsafe conditions.
The end tenants usually have no idea. They sign what looks like a legitimate tenancy agreement. They pay their deposit. But legally,
because their landlord breached their own contract to put them there, the end tenants have almost no security of tenure.
If the actual owner discovers the scam, or if the middle tenant stops paying the superior landlord and vanishes with the deposits,
the end tenants can face sudden, immediate eviction. They are collateral damage in a scheme designed purely for cash extraction. This isn't just happening in the private sector. The subletting empire has deeply infiltrated social housing, creating a secondary market that is costing the British taxpayer an absolute fortune. Social housing is designed as a safety net. It is subsidized housing for those in genuine need. But because the rents are significantly below market rate,
it is highly vulnerable to arbitrage.
Under the Prevention of Social Housing Fraud Act 2013, illegal subletting of social housing is a criminal offence. It carries the threat of prosecution,
severe fines and unlawful profit orders. Yet, despite the criminal penalties, research from the Tenancy Fraud Forum estimates that up to 150,000 social homes in England are currently subject to some form of tenancy fraud. In London, the crisis is most acute. It is estimated that roughly 1 in every 20 social homes in the capital is being illegally sublet. Outside of London, it is approximately 1 in 30. And the methods are evolving. It's no longer just subletting to a friend for cash. An analysis recently estimated that over 5,800 council houses were actively being marketed as short-term holiday lets on platforms like Airbnb. Property subsidised by the taxpayer to house a vulnerable family is instead being used as an illicit tax-free hotel for weekend tourists. The original tenant moves elsewhere, often back with family or into another property, and pockets the massive difference. The financial impact of this is staggering. Because these 150,000 homes are occupied by fraudsters, genuine families on the waiting list have nowhere to go.
Councils are legally obligated to house them, which means they are forced to rely on astronomically expensive temporary accommodation, like budget hotels and B&Bs.
This bottleneck, created directly by social housing fraud, is estimated to cost the British taxpayer up to £1 billion every single year. It is a completely invisible drain on the public purse. The government is aware of the gap. The newly proposed Renters' Rights Act includes provisions for a new national private rented sector database. The intention is to increase transparency, allowing local authorities and landlords to track tenancies more efficiently. If every property and every landlord must be registered, the theory is that the middlemen will be squeezed out, but a database is only as effective as the people enforcing it. And just like the food safety inspectors we talked about before, local authority housing enforcement teams have been decimated by a decade of funding cuts.
To prosecute an illegal HMO or a rent-to-rent scam requires investigation. It requires gathering evidence, interviewing vulnerable tenants, issuing notices, and preparing for complex tribunal hearings.
Councils simply do not have the manpower to proactively hunt for these properties. They rely entirely on reactive intelligence.
The statistics bear this out. When secret sublets are discovered in the private sector, 31% of the time it is because neighbours report unusual activity or high turnover.
Another 28% are caught during routine landlord inspections, and 24% are discovered due to noise complaints, property damage,
or antisocial behaviour.
But when a landlord finally discovers the deception, the nightmare is often just beginning. Because the law in the UK heavily protects the occupants of a property,
even if they were placed there illegally.
If the middle tenant failed to get an HMO licence, the local authority can issue a rent repayment order, and incredibly, the courts have sometimes ruled that the superior landlord, the actual owner who had no idea the property was an HMO, is the one liable for the fines. The property owner can face tens of thousands of pounds in penalties, and their landlord insurance is almost always completely invalidated the moment the unauthorised subletting began. Meanwhile, the middle tenant, the person who orchestrated the scam, often just dissolves their limited company, vanishes into the wind, and sets up a new one the very next day. They operate with total impunity.
The subletting empires thrive in the spaces where regulation fails to look. They exploit the desperation of tenants looking for affordable rooms. They exploit the naivety of hands-off landlords, and they exploit a system that is too underfunded to catch them.
Every night, thousands of people go to sleep in homes that do not belong to the person they pay rent to. They sleep behind uncertified fire doors in living rooms partitioned by plasterboard, funding a multi-billion-pound shadow economy. The housing market in Britain is broken, and wherever a market breaks, someone is always waiting in the shadows ready to profit from the pieces. I'm off the books.